Hello YouTube, I'm Pilot Stud and welcome to another video. Today I'll be showing you how to land a Cessna 152 in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Stay tuned. Hello YouTube, welcome back to another video. Now today I'll be showing you how to land a Cessna 152 in Microsoft Flight Simulator. If you're new here, be sure to like, comment and subscribe. I do flight training videos, flight sim videos, trip reports and a lot more, so if you love everything about aviation, you've certainly come to the right place. But now let's get into this tutorial. Okay, so here we are in our Cessna 152, and before you even think about landing, the thing you need to think about is descending. Descent is of course really important. So in a Cessna 152, I recommend a descent rate of 500 feet per minute, as you can see now, and if you can, try and get your RPM down to 1,800. Cruise RPM is normally 2,300, that's optimum for cruise, but while descending, try and get down to 500 feet per minute, and your RPM to 1,800. Speed does matter, but to be honest, during this phase of flight it can be anywhere from 60 to 90. 60 is probably a bit slow. I'm probably going a bit slow right now, so if I really wanted to I could increase power, but of course I'd have to remember to push the nose down. Now trimming is also really important when you're descending, so make sure you've got a well trimmed aircraft. As you can see, if I trim, I'm already quite well trimmed, so right now I'm not really putting much input in and I'm descending down at 500 feet per minute. Now you can see Norwich in front of us. Here's a chart of Norwich Airport. It's a fantastic airport for VFR flyers. It's never too busy and it's got a stunning approach over the Norfolk Broads. Now let's talk about flaps. As you can see on the speed gauge, there's a little white arc. Now you can extend flaps freely below this white arc, but not above them. I do not recommend you do this because it basically will break your flaps. It'll push them over the limits. Now this is a rather long runway, so we don't really need to worry about flaps. You could if you wanted to, if it's a shorter runway, a wet runway, or for any other reason that you need to fly slower, but for this runway we don't really need them. But just for the sake of the video, I'll be using them. So as you can see there, because I just brought the flaps back up, we've got to slow down. So make sure you move the power back. We're at around 100 knots now, which is probably too quickly, but we're bringing it back. We're at 90 now. So once we get past 90, we can bring our first set of flaps down and you'll notice that the plane begins to pitch up. And there you go, you see the plane pitches up, so we've got to correct that, apply a little bit of power and push the nose down. Now what we're doing right now is what we know as a powered descent. This means you descend 500 feet per minute at an RPM of 1,800. It's optimum for runways like this and airports like this really. But you can do an unpowered descent if you really needed to, but I'm not going to show you that today because that gets into the limits of advanced and dangerous stuff. Now before we get to the airport, I need to tell you something very important. You'll hear this throughout aviation. You can always go around. Now going around might always not seem like the best option, but if you've got an unstabilised approach, if it's not good enough and if it doesn't look good enough, then going around is sometimes the best option. If you mess up your approach, please just go around. In real life, it could save a life. Now as we get closer to the airport, you'll notice 4 white lights. These are the PAPI lights, which I believe stands for Precision Approach Path Indicator. Now this takes into account the angle you're coming in, and it will show you 4 lights. The optimum is 2 red and 2 white. That means you're on the perfect glide slope. Now if you're a little bit low, it may show you 3 red and 1 white, and if you're a little high, it may show you 3 white and 1 red. If you're too low, it will show you 4 red. I highly recommend you go around at this point to avoid crashing just before the runway. And if you're too high, it will show you 4 white. Also, I recommend going around here unless it's a very long runway and you can take it into account. Now the runway here at Norwich is quite long for the Cessna 152. In fact, I'd say you could easily land on half the runway. So you don't really need to worry about height here, but it's always good to take it into account. So as you can see right now, our speed is at 80, and as we come down, we will need to push the nose down a bit just to get the correct height. So you'll see right now, the feet per minute or the vertical speed indicator is dropping below 500. Now, as you get closer to the airport, make sure you slow your descent rate to around 100 feet per minute, ready to flare. If you come into the airport at 500 feet per minute, it's not going to end very well, so be sure you pitch up and lose some power Basically, as soon as you lose some power, it will increase your descent rate. So you've really got to compensate between power and pitch. Make sure you slow your descent rate, but also keep a good enough speed that you don't stall, because that's never very good. You may not be familiar with the term flare. Flaring is basically where you pull back on the stick just before landing to make sure your back landing gears touch the ground before your front gear. It's important to avoid damage on the aircraft. Now in the Cessna 152 this can be quite difficult for first time flyers, as obviously the gears are quite close together. But practice makes perfect, you'll certainly get the hang of it. So right now I believe the PAPIs are saying 4 white, which means we are too high. But to be honest, I think we're fine. As we come down you can see our speeds dropping, you'll see those lights swap over soon. Now optimum landing speeds. For full flaps, landing speed can be anywhere from 55 to 65 knots, and for no flaps, 70 to 75. Seeing as we're using half, I think we're at a good speed. Now to line yourselves up with the centre line, not that it really matters. I'm going to draw a line down the middle of the screen now. You want to line up the centre of the yoke with the centre line. In most aircraft it's like this because honestly, there's very little difference between you and the wheel, so it doesn't really matter. So as you can see, the PAPI has changed now as we get closer to the ground, and we're coming to a nice speed. You want to prepare to flare. We're a bit off the centre line, but as we're coming down, you just want to let the plane basically glide into the ground. And there you go, that was quite smooth guys, although off the centre line. So as you came down, you just see me pulled back slightly on the yoke there just to flare. Unfortunately there's no replay mode in Microsoft Flight Simulator yet, so I can't show you that. But as I can tell you, it was very smooth. We came down at a good speed with a good vertical speed. So now we'll taxi off and I'll talk about some of the things you need to remember, and we'll just recap what I've told you. So here we are, we're parked on the stand in front of Saxon Air, or near to Saxon Air, it's at the back there. And now I'm going to recap some of the things I told you. It might have seemed a little rushed because I was landing. So, the first things first, while you're cruising, the perfect cruise RPM is 2,300. Just so keep in mind, just before you start your descent and while you're at cruise, which is of course the longest period of flight, you should make sure your RPM is somewhere around 2,300. Now the descent you saw us there was a power descent, which meant we used the power to descend, so we brought back power, and because of that we descended. So, the ideal descent rate, the ideal vertical speed is 500 feet per minute. You can see it on the vertical speed indicator throughout the landing there. And to achieve this, I recommend an RPM of 1,800. Now for a descent speed, aim for around 90 knots, but it can be 80. Really depends on the runway length. Now with flaps, I only recommend you extend flaps under the white arc because otherwise they can get damaged. Make sure you stick to that 500 feet per minute descent rate. Now, before you approach the runway, remember that you can always go around. It's not going to hurt anyone. It might hurt you if you don't go around. Now, depending on whether or not you extended flaps, your landing speed should be with no flaps anywhere from 70 to 75 knots. It can be under if it's a shorter or longer runway. It really depends. It doesn't really matter as long as you're gentle. And if you've got full flaps, we had half flaps as you saw on that landing, then full flaps is anywhere from 55 to 65 knots. Remember, if you feel yourself slipping during descent too fast, if you're descending too quickly, add power and bring yourself back up to a good descent rate of 500 feet per minute. The most important things to remember are keep an eye on speed and keep an eye on vertical speed. Without them, you're not getting anywhere. You'll either descend too quickly, go too quickly, and you'll end up crashing into the runway and having a heavy landing, which is of course what you do not want. And remember, keep an eye on the PAPIs. We were a bit too high through that approach there, but as we got closer to the runway, the PAPIs sorted themselves out. So always remember to use the PAPIs, they can really help you out, and that will also encourage you to look outside, which is always very important while landing. So I hope this video has helped you guys. I know it probably wasn't explained perfectly, I'm no professional, but there's some of the tips I use to help you land. I hope this has really helped you. Be sure to like, comment and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thanks to all my captains. But from me today, that is all. Bye bye.